Now to the business at hand, Black history. I take Black history very seriously. And forgive my arrogance, but I think it is a topic that is often treated superficially. When you talk about Black history, you must keep three principles in mind. Number one, it must be unapologetically Black. Black history is about a particular people in a particular time, in a particular place. But it must be more than Black. Black history is the story of a nation attempting to achieve lofty ideas. And finally, Black history must be about the future. Any telling of the past is truly and ultimately about changing the future. Black history is about a distinct people in a distinct place at a distinct time. Black history is first and foremost about people of African descent who came to these United States through free migration or forced transportation. We must remember that February celebrates the stories of these distinct people who have suffered and triumphed in this land. In this month, we remember Black luminaries, the musical notes of John Coltrane, his improvisation, his creativity, his ability to make the saxophone an extension of his soul. We remember Malcolm X for speaking truth to power. We remember W.E.B. Du Bois for his scholarship and activism. We remember Harriet Tubman for leading slaves to freedom by the sheer force of her will. And when that wasn't enough, by the force of her shotgun. We remember Madam C.J. Walker for being an entrepreneur and a self-made millionaire at a time when being Black, female, and rich was itself an act of defiance. But to speak only about Black success would not be telling even half the story. You cannot tell the story of Black folk without speaking of obstacles and obstructions. Because it is that context that demonstrates truly how remarkable we are. Without an understanding of slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and mass incarceration, you cannot understand the historic nature of a Barack Obama. 152 years ago, Black people were not considered people at all. Only property, things to be bought and sold. Allow that to sink in. Things to be bought and sold. So when you speak of the presidency of Barack Obama, you are bearing witness to what was once property become president in just 152 years. What was once property became president. 152 years, a mere bat of the eye when viewed through a historical gaze. 100 years ago, lynch mobs were free to attack Blacks at will. The most minor of perceived slights to a white person would result in a Black man hanging from a tree. These attacks happened so often that people compared the hanging bodies to apples and oranges. These strange fruit, as they were called, would hang just like the sweet peach found all over Georgia and South Carolina. These scenes were so common and so accepted that parents would take their children to have pictures made in front of them. The children would giggle and the parents would smile next to the lifeless black bodies. Have I made you uncomfortable yet? Have I picked at the ever-festering wound of race? Simply put, there is nothing comfortable about black history. But black history must be more than black. If you think that black history is only about black folk, then you have missed the point. Black history is the story of a nation attempting to obtain lofty goals. It is the story of these United States attempting to put meaning to the ideas embodied in our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. We declare these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they have been endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are literally the words that began our nation. 241 years later, we still have not lived their meaning. If we can agree that race was America's original sin, then black history has been the long road to repentance. We're talking about the abolitionist movement. We're talking about black and white faces of the civil rights marches. We're talking about Brown v. Board of Education, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. We're talking about cross-cultural movements to end mass incarceration. Every step forward for black folk has been a step forward for America. Allow me to draw your attention to one step forward in particular. The year is 1963. The place is Birmingham, Alabama. And we are with the great Dr. King. He is at one of the lowest places in his public career. At this point in his life, Dr. King is 34 years old. And he is by no means the undisputed leader of the civil rights movement that we remember him as. He is not universally loved. He is not the universally loved leader and icon that we have made him in hindsight. No. At this point, he is a controversial and radical figure, decried in the white community as an agitator and troublemaker, and in much of the black community as a spotlight seeker and headline chaser. He has recently come off one of the most stinging public defeats of his life in Albany, Georgia. In Albany, Dr. King attempted to desegregate public facilities. However, he was outmaneuvered by Albany's local sheriff. Unlike other sheriffs King had encountered, Sheriff Pritchett would not allow his deputies to violently attack King's nonviolent protesters. And without the customary overreach from local law enforcement, King's nonviolent tactics could not draw the attention of national headlines and were therefore useless. He was forced to leave Albany without desegregating any accommodations and was particularly blamed for the failed campaign. With this defeat still fresh, King enters Birmingham, and again he hopes to end segregation and public accommodations. Bathrooms, pools, buses, courts, all segregated. And the first thing he does is seek out adults to help him march and go to jail to fight segregation. But there are no adults to be found. The old folk have seen how ineffective his Alvin campaign was. And regardless, they have their jobs, their responsibilities, their reputations to protect, and of course, their bills to pay. And at this moment, King turned to you. He turns to the very people sitting in these seats: high school students, middle school students, even children in the elementaries. And when the time came, wave after wave of young people walked out of their Birmingham schools and into Birmingham jails to protest segregation. So many young people went to jail that officers began to plead with the youngest of them: just please go home. Just imagine armed officers pleading with 7 or 8-year-old children to just go home. And when they couldn't put any more children in jail, and couldn't get them to go home, they turned on their water hoses. And when they saw the how high-powered hoses could bruise the children's skin but could not stop their spirit, they sent the dogs after them. And when the bites didn't back them down, the officers pulled out their batons. But still, the young people stayed. If you look at the screen, you'll see that this is where these iconic photos come from. I relay that moment in history because ultimately, every telling of the past is really about the future. Ask yourself, why is it that we have old men come to speak to young people about things that happened in the past? Not to change what is done, but to change what is to come. We teach history to change the future. And we teach it to young people because the future belongs to you. Activism is a young person's game. Change is a young person's game. Always has been, always will be. But youth is fleeting, and with it goes the will to act. King turned to young people because they have the freedom and inclination to speak truth to power. Each day that I look in the mirror, I wonder, am I slowly losing the passion to make change? Are the comforts and worries of life sapping me of the will to seek justice above all else? But you in this room are free from those concerns. There is not a parent, teacher, coach, or superintendent who can define to you what the future of America will hold. Those decisions are yours. You will decide what will be important, what will be worth changing, if anything is worth changing. Take the lessons of Black history, both the awesome and the awful, and change the future. Thank you.